What's up? I'm Pip, and today we're going to be talking about upgrading the most wanted deck from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I'm going to have 10, 20, 50, and $100 options. Our commander today is Olivia, Opulent Outlaw. Olivia is a 3/3 flying lifelinker, and when any outlaw connects, you are going to create a treasure. Her second ability costs 3 generic. You sacrifice 2 treasures and put 2 1/1 counters on each of your creatures. Our plan is to quickly go wide with outlaws, stack up on treasure, and bully down our opponents. I'm going to be adding a handful of treasure generators and treasure payoffs to help us recover and quickly finish off our opponents. Oh, you like shooting first, asking questions later? This is the deck for you. Alright, let's start with the $10 version. What's going in? Kellogg, Dangerous Mind. Weird name. 3/2, first strike haste for 3. And whenever he attacks, we're going to create a treasure. This is going to be doubling up on what our commander is already trying to do, so it fits in quite nicely. Sacrifice 5 treasures, gain control of target creature for as long as you control Kellogg. I don't imagine we're going to be doing this too much, but it is a nice option. It's a little risky because they do get the creature back when they deal with this, but if you need to remove a blocker or get some extra damage in, we have the option. I just love this card in Commander. 4/4 for 5, and whenever it connects, you're going to untap each creature you control, and you're going to get another combat phase. You can't attack the same player though. If you're going to be playing an aggressive deck in Commander, I feel like you need this extra oomph to finish everybody off. And he's a pirate. Magda the Horde Master. This is a new one. She's not an outlaw, unfortunately. She is a 2/2 for 2, and whenever you commit a crime, you're going to create another treasure. Then you can sacrifice 3 treasures and make a 4/4 flying Scorpion Dragon token. This is going to give us another outlet to use our treasures. Our board isn't quite as wide as we'd like it to be. This might be a better option in some scenarios. Breaches, Eager Pillager. 3/3, first strike for 3. Whenever a pirate you control attacks, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. So if we have more than one pirate, we can trigger more than one of these abilities. Create a treasure, awesome, on theme. Target creature can't block this turn, great for getting through more damage. And exile the top card of your library, you may play it this turn. This one's a little better on some of the later turns in case we start running out of gas. Because we're playing Breaches, I've prioritized pirates a bit while building the deck. So, if it looks a little pirate heavy, that's why. Mirkwood Bats. Again, not an outlaw, just a bat. But whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. Plus, with all the treasure generation I'm adding, this should add up pretty quickly. Laughing Jasper Flint. 4/3 for 3. Creatures you control but don't own are mercenaries, in addition to each of their other types. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top X cards of target opponent's library, where X is the number of outlaws you control, which should be a pretty high number. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those cards, and use any type of mana to do so. Unfortunately, this isn't symmetrical, but it is going to give us access to a few more options. Plus, with all that treasure sitting around, we might be able to cast quite a few of them. Kalain, Reclusive Painter. Again, not an outlaw, but for 2 mana, it's going to enter the battlefield and create a treasure token, which is basically like a mana rock. And then other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on them for each mana from a treasure you spent to cast them. She's going to allow us to translate some of that treasure we're using into extra power without having to use Olivia's ability. Hellspur Posse Boss. Kinda surprised this one's not in the Precon. 4 mana, 2/4. Other outlaws you control have haste. A very good ability in this deck. And when it comes into play, it's going to create 2 mercenary tokens. Swashbuckler Extraordinaire. 2/2 for 3, and when it enters the battlefield, it's going to create a treasure. Whenever you attack, you may sacrifice 1 or more treasures. When you do, up to that many target creatures gain double strike. This guy's going to allow us to end some games quicker than we normally would. And he doesn't even need to be attacking to use that ability. You can play him and use it that turn. Agent of the Iron Throne. It's kind of weird that this is not a creature, but commander creatures you own have whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. This is going to allow us to turn all that treasure we have stacking up into damage. Plus, it reminds me of Game of Thrones, and I really wish they would do that as a Universes Beyond set. Decree of Pain. 8 mana, very pricey. Destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. Draw a creature for each creature destroyed this way. I know this is a lot of mana, but we should have a bunch of treasures laying around. And if we fall behind or our board gets dealt with, this is going to allow us to refill and wipe the board at the same time. Plus, you can cycle this for 5, draw a card, and -2/-2 everything. Probably not going to happen that often, but we have the option. Overwhelming Forces. This is essentially the same thing as Decree of Pain. 8 mana, wipe the board, and draw a card for each creature. We're not going to want to use this too often, but if we fall behind, we should have the means to. Ruinous Ultimatum. Again, with all that treasure laying around, this shouldn't be too hard to cast, and it should ensure all the outlaws we have are doing the damage we need. Lastly, we're going to be adding a few mana rocks in this deck. And they're all going to be 2 mana rocks so that we can get our commander out more reliably on turn 3. Boros Signet, Cold Steel Heart, Talisman of Indulgence, Talisman of Conviction, and Talisman of Hierarchy. Now that's it for the $10 version. Let's move on to the $20 version. Alright, I'm going to hit pause real quick just to ask you to smash that like and subscribe button. Looking at the data over on my supercomputer, I can see that only 1% of you nerds who watch my videos are subscribed. Now, I'm gonna have to sell my kidneys if I don't get about, 32% of you guys to subscribe to my channel. Alright, back to the video. Campbell, Profiteering Mayor. Whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them, create a tapped copy. This only happens once per turn. And whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, drain your opponents for 1. This is another drain trigger when creating treasures, and if your opponents are up to any of the same type of funny business we are, we're gonna tax them for it. Marionette Master. 6 mana for a 1/3? Yuck. So when this enters the battlefield, we could put 3/1/1 counters on it, or create 3/1/1 servo artifact creatures. And whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to its power. This card gives us a few options. It's going to allow us to go either wide or tall, and decide if we want to drain them out by sacrificing treasures, or build up a wider army that continues to grow. Robber of the Rich, 2 mana, 2/2, Rich Haste. Whenever Robber of the Rich attacks, if the defending player has more cards in hand than you, exile the top card of their library. During any turn you've attacked with a rogue, you may cast that card, and you may spend mana of any color. We do have a handful of rogues, so we will be able to cast those cards later in the game. We're mostly playing this because it's a 2/2 haste creature that's an outlaw. With upside. Phyrexian Arena. Enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. This is a good option in any aggressive deck where we might be running out of cards. Call of the Ring. 2 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you, and whenever you choose a creature as the ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. This is going to give us a plethora of amazing effects, and draw us extra cards. Dark Ritual. We want to get on board fast in this deck, so I think it's worth sacrificing the card advantage for the tempo. Plus, we have plenty of ways to regain that card advantage later in the game. Bottle Cap Blast. 5 mana Improvise, which means you can use your treasures as mana rocks instead of having to sacrifice them to cast this one. And it deals 5 damage to any target. Excess damage will create that many treasures. This gives us options in case we want to stack up on treasures quickly, or take out a pesky creature. I don't normally like single target removal, but if it's helping us with our main game plan, let's give it a try. Lich Knight's Conquest. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and/or tokens, and return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is another card that gets us back in the game after a board win. We can trade our treasures for all the creatures they just killed. Concealed Courtyard. This is a nice quick duel to shore up our mana base. Inspiring Vantage. Same thing. Nice quick duel to shore up our mana base. Alright, that's it for the $20 version. Let's move on to the $50. Mind's Eye, 5 mana. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. This is just a nice solid card, and it would allow us to translate some of our treasures or excess mana into card draw each turn. Revel in Riches, the card every treasure deck wants to play. Whenever a creature and opponent dies, create a treasure token. And at the beginning of your upkeep, control 10 or more treasures. You win the game. Be careful playing this card. Your opponents will want to kill you immediately once it hits the board. Make sure you're in firm control before you drop this card. Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. 2 mana, 2/1, and whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose a life and create a treasure. This guy's just going to create a handful of extra treasure for us, and we don't really mind the life loss when our commander has lifelink. Zorn, 3 mana, 3/2. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those treasure tokens plus an additional treasure token. Seems like one of the best cards in the deck. Alright, that's it for the $50 version. Let's move on to the $100. Goldspan Dragon. 5 mana, 4/4 flying haste, and whenever it attacks or becomes a target of a spell, create a treasure. And treasure you control add 2 mana instead of 1. This card is very good in this type of deck. But he's pretty pricey, so he didn't find a home until the $100 version. Grim Hireling. Grim Hireling, 4 mana, 3/2. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasures. Then you can turn your treasures into removal if you need to. It's not at a good rate, but we have the option if it's there. Mostly this is going to be more treasure generation. Professional Facebreaker, 3 mana, 2/3 menace. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. And you can sacrifice a treasure to impulse draw. More treasure generation, and more things to do with that treasure. Generous Plunderer. 2 mana, 2/2 menace. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. So, you get to pick who gets it, which can help make some alliances, and whenever Generous Plunderer attacks, it deals damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. It doesn't need to be the same player, but it could allow us to cash in on those favors later in the game, or just get a little extra damage in on whoever has the most mana rocks. Alright, let's talk about the cards that are coming out. I'm gonna break them down into 4 categories. Bad, meh, okay, and pretty good. The bad cards are cards you pretty much always want to take out of your deck. The meh cards are cards that, if you don't have better options, leave them in, but they're not great. The okay cards are, well, okay. If you leave them in, I wouldn't blame you. And the pretty good cards are cards I wouldn't mind leaving in there. And are only coming out in the higher value upgrade versions. Let's start with the bad category. First up, Humble Defector. 2 mana, 2/1, draw 2 cards. Target opponent gains control of Humble Defector. Why would I want to do that? Guess it's a rogue? No thanks. I guess you could make a buddy and pass it back and forth and draw a bunch of cards, but I'm not very into the idea of helping any of my opponents. Fane the Broker. 3 mana, 3/3, so not great. And you need to tap him to do things. And the things he does are not that impressive. But wait, you can pay 4 mana to untap him and do it again. Still not very good. Marshland Bloodcaster. 5 mana, 3/5 flying. For a black and a colorless and tapping this, you can cheat a spell into play by paying life instead of mana. This effect would be pretty good on a cheaper creature, but when you already have this amount of mana, I don't really see the point. Feed the Swarm. 2 mana, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. I think I would just rather play any other 2 mana removal spell than this one. And it's a sorcery. I guess it hits an enchantment, which is kind of okay? Council's Judgment. 3 mana, starting with you. Each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes, or tie for the most votes. I'd rather just choose what I'm destroying than have to play politics with it. Painful Truths. 3 mana, sorcery. You draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast the spell. So at most, you could pay 3 life and draw 3 cards. You'd have to use 2 treasures to do it, or have all 3 of your colors. Not that great of a deal. I'd rather just use Phyrexian Arena or any of the other consistent card draw cards. Heliod's Intervention. 2 white and X. Destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. There are certainly better options for removal, and the life gain, I don't want to plan to have to do that. Trailblazer's Boots. 2 mana, equip 2 equipment. Equipped creature has non-basic land walk. You can use this to force the creature through, but I think we're just going to attack the most undefended player so that we can get those treasure triggers. Bandit's Hall. This is a 3 mana mana rock that over time can draw you cards. I think it's mostly in the deck just because of the flavor. I don't think it actually fits in too well. Demolition Field. This isn't really in line with anything we're doing, so I don't know why I would have it in here, especially in a 3-color deck without green. Temple of the False God. I really don't like this card in decks that can't ramp. If you get stuck with this, it's totally useless. Alright, that's it for the bad category. Let's move on to meh. Marine the Diversion. 3 mana, 3/3. First strike. 2 mana and sack an artifact or creature and goad target creature. We want to be the aggressor in these games, so I don't think something like this is really going to make much of a difference. Camber the Plunderer. 4 mana, 3/4 lifelink. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life and create a blood token. Neither of those things we really need. If it would drain them for 1, I could see it being pretty good. Misfortune Teller. 4 mana, 3/1 Death Touch. Whenever a Misfortune Teller enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature, create a 2/2 black rogue. If it was a land, create a treasure. Otherwise, you gain 3 life. At 4 mana, I think this is just a little too slow for what we're trying to do. And that 1 toughness is kind of a problem. Ogre Slumlord. 5 mana, 3/3. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may create a 1/1 black rat creature token. Rats you control have Death Touch. Not exactly in line with anything else we're doing. I guess it would make some more bodies to put counters on, but at 5 mana, I don't really love it. Hex. 6 mana, destroy 6 creatures. This is kinda cool, but unless there's 6 targets, you can't cast it. I do like the flavor text though. When killing 5 just isn't enough. Deadly Dispute. 2 mana, sacrifice a creature or artifact, along with the casting cost. Draw 2 cards, and create a treasure. This card is decent, but I feel like we just have other things we'd rather be doing, and better ways to draw cards. Bounty Board. I really like the flavor of this card, and I think it's going to make for some fun, interesting games. So, I may just leave it in there half of the time for the fun politicking that comes up around it, but I don't think it's actually that strong, and you may be helping some people that you don't necessarily want to. Cool card though, really cool card design. Shiny Impetus. 3 mana, Aura. Target creature gets +2/+2 and is goaded. And whenever it attacks, you create a treasure. This is a pseudo removal spell, but I think I'd rather just be advancing our game plan. We Ride at Dawn. 3 mana enchantment. Legendary creatures spells you cast have Convoke, which means you can tap creatures to help pay for the mana cost. Whenever your commander attacks, create a 1/1 mercenary creature token. With all the treasure we're making, I don't think we need that many ways to cheat out creatures. And the mercenaries don't add too much to our game plan. I don't know, I don't think it's necessary. Life Insurance. 5 mana, enchantment, extort. So whenever you cast a spell, you can pay white or black mana, and you drain each opponent if you do. And whenever a non-creature token dies, you lose 1 life and create a treasure. This card is kinda cool, but I think it's a little slow at 5 mana. If we were chaining together a lot of spells, I could see the extort really paying off. I don't think we're gonna be doing it that often. Command Bacon. Command Beacon. Sacrifice Command Bacon. Put your commander into your hand from your command zone. I don't really want to run too many colorless lands in a deck like this, but if people start ganging up on you, this could help a lot in the late game. Alright, that's it for the meh cards. Let's move on to the okay category. Glittering Stockpile. 3 mana Mana Rock, and when you tap it for mana, you put a stash counter on it. You can tap it and sack it to add mana of 1 color equal to the number of stash counters. I'd rather just have cheaper Mana Rocks, but I guess this can add up and you can have some big explosive turn later in the game. Mist Meadow Skulk. 2 mana 1/1 lifeline. Protection from converted mana cost 3 or greater. I think this is only ever useful if you begin growing your creatures, and it might not live that long. But if it does, I guess I could see it having a pretty big impact on the game. Charred Grave Robber. 3 mana, 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, return target outlaw card from your graveyard to your hand. And you can play it again for its escape cost. Exile 4 other cards from your graveyard and pay 5. When it escapes, it comes in as a 4/2. Recursion is pretty decent, but this is kind of a steep cost. Nighthawk Scavenger. 3 mana, star 3. Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink. Its power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. This should end up being a pretty impressive creature in the late game, but it doesn't really advance our game plan in any other way. Aetherborn Marauder. 2/2 flying lifelinker for 4. When it enters the battlefield, it can steal +1/+1 counters from any of your other creatures. Again, another creature that could be pretty impressive in the late game, but doesn't really advance our game plan in any other way. I can't imagine I'd want to move my 1/1 counters to a creature that doesn't have haste though. Massacre Girl. When she enters the battlefield, each creature gets -1/-1, and then if a creature dies, you do that all over again. I feel like I'd rather replace this with some other board wipes. Most of the time, if we have any sort of board, this is gonna bite us too. Tenured Inkcaster. 5 mana, 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Whenever a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Later in the game, if we're very wide, we could slam this and drain a bunch of life. But I think there's better finishers that rely less on us already winning. Requisition Raid. I do like these spree cards because they give you so many options. This one doubles as artifact and enchantment removal, plus it can put another 1/1 counter on each of our creatures. I'd only really want to replace this with something pretty impactful. Boros Charm, 2 mana. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player, or permanents you control are indestructible this turn, or target creature gains double strike until end of turn. This card does give you some great options, and each one of them has their place. Shoot the Sheriff. As long as we're not going up against another outlaw deck, this should be pretty great removal. Alright, that's it for the okay category. Let's move on to the pretty good category. Bane Witch Coven, 3 mana, 3/3 menace. Whenever you gain life, you may pay a black mana. If you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Since our commander does have lifelink, this shouldn't be too hard to trigger, and it'll help us claw our way back into a game after a board wipe. Rankle, Master of Pranks, 4 mana, 3/3 flying haste. Whenever Rankle deals combat damage to player, choose any number of these. Each player discards a card, each player loses 1 life and draws a card, or each player sacrifices a creature. This card gives you enough options, I'm sure one of them is going to be beneficial at the time, if not more than one. Dire Fleet Ravager, 5 mana, 4/4 menace death touch. When it enters the battlefield, each player loses 1/3 of his or her life, rounded up. Later in the game, you could catch somebody off guard with this and take them out pretty easily. Witch of the Moors, 5 mana, 4/4 death touch. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, since our commander has lifelink, this shouldn't be too hard. Each opponent sacrifices a creature and you return up to 1 target creature from your graveyard to your hand. After a board wipe, this could help us claw back into a decent position. Although at 5 mana, there are probably more impactful things to do. Mass Mutiny. This is a really fun card. For 5 mana, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures and they gain haste. This is another good way to surprise the table and take somebody out. The reason I'm opting to drop it is because it's pretty dependent on what your opponents are doing. And if they're not playing for the board, it can have a pretty low impact. Seize the Spotlight, 3 mana sorcery. Each opponent chooses Fame or Fortune. For each player who chose Fame, gain control of a creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures and they gain haste. For each player who chose Fortune, you draw a card and create a treasure. This card has some cool options for politicking, but I don't want to leave it up to them to decide how impactful a card I'm playing is. Curtain's Call, 6 mana, destroy 2 creatures. This card costs 1 less for each opponent. So if everyone's still in the game, this is a pretty good rate. So that's it for the deck. I find these typo decks a little harder to upgrade than usual. You don't have as many options because you have to stick to certain creature types. And when you're doing this for a Precon, everybody wants to buy those same creature types at the same time, so the prices often go up. This deck is pretty good out of the box, and unlike some of the other decks in this cycle, to really upgrade it, I think you need to spend some money. So, what'd you think? Do you like it? Am I an idiot? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.